Okay, so we've gotten the transaxle out of the back of this 944. It's not that big of a job. It's fairly straightforward. So that's not that big of a deal. It's out. Still need to remove the rear suspension to get the torque tube out. That's what it looks like up in there. That's the back of the torque tube right there with the bell housing type flange on it. So the whole rear suspension, this is where the torsion bars, they're in this tube that goes across the back of the car. And rear shocks, rear control arms. So that whole thing is bolted into the chassis, and after you remove the shocks and the brake lines and a few other things, then you can unbolt this and drop it down out of the way so the torque tube can come out. There's still a couple little cross members that have to come out that are just held in with 2 bolts each. This is what the inside of the bell housing of the transaxle looks like. This is the coupler that couples the splines from the transaxle to the splines in the torque tube. They're the same spline count, so they line up, and there's a clamping bolt that goes through here. See, this is split open, so it'll squeeze, and the same thing on the transaxle side. So I spoke with the guy that refurbishes torque tubes for these things, and he explained that the split bottom torque tubes really aren't useful on a high horsepower application. They actually did the split in the torque tube on the 3-liter engines to help compensate for some of the extra vibration that the bigger 4-cylinder engine makes, and it apparently wasn't such a good idea. So I have to shop for a torque tube that has a good clutch splines. That's apparently a common failure area, is the splines that the clutch ride on right there. Good rear splines, and also the nub gets worn on them too, so that's another thing to look for. Also, some of them, the nub gets broken off. That's what sits in the pilot bearing in the front of the engine, or the back of the engine, front of the drive shaft. So yeah, and also the little bell housing on the back of the torque tube is not removable. So if it's cracked around the any of the mounting areas, or the threads are screwed up in the top of the thing where the bolts thread right into the housing, it's not really a usable torque tube. So yeah, it's time to go shopping for a used torque tube. I have a line on a couple of them, but got to look at them to make sure they're actually usable. So yeah, it's going to be a while until we get back to the engine here. Sorry, but that's what we got to do. The torque tube is like in the middle of the car, and everything's got to come apart to get it in and out of the car. So it's important to have that done right, especially if you're embarking on a V8 project.